Now that was quite a text, filled with rules and standards, exclusions, threats, and gouging and dismemberment. No joke, though. In the past, I know that there are some of you here today who have been clobbered by this passage, possibly shunned by a community claiming to represent God on the matter. And I know also that that can produce a kind of theological PTSD. Or maybe you sat here today listening, convicting yourself with fear in your heart. And the fear of a punishing God that we absorb, maybe we heard it as children or absorbed it somewhere along the way, that rests in our lower brain stem. And regardless of how your rational adult mind tries to work it through, that fear that attends below and within you can remain there and come up and almost traumatize us again and again. And so that might have been really hard to listen to. So it is my prayer that together this morning, by God's grace, we can open up this text for a deeper and more life-giving look. So let me begin with the good news right out of the gate. Just as Mark reminded us last week in the text on salt and light, which precedes this passage, this is from the Sermon on the Mount, the core of Jesus' teaching to his disciples. And he's speaking to them as a collective, as a community. And his deliberate shock language is intended to wake us up to the reality that our faith is only truly meaningful within the context of community. But the problem is that because of passages like this, those who might benefit from hearing a more generous consideration are probably not here. They have exited the premises, many, if not most. And we know, according to recent polls, that 27% of Americans consider themselves spiritual, but not religious. And that's an older poll, 3 years old. I'm sure it's more now. These are people who deeply care about the things that matter. But church, not so much. And this doesn't really surprise me. Recently, we held a wonderful spiritual writers workshop right here in the chapel. 52 people attended, and 32% of them were self-proclaimed spiritual, but not religious. And how I know that is because many of them admitted it to me that they had to actually dare themselves to come to the event, even though the topic greatly interested them. Why? Because it was being held in a church. And for various unimaginable reasons, and some that are quite imaginable, they avoided organized religion or anything connected to it. But after that workshop, some of those very same people came up to me and face-to-face admitted that they hungered for the kind of community and deep connection that they'd experienced during the course of the day. I'm still getting emails and having visits with folks who are eager to know more about the way this community nurtures and communicates faith. And I'm not surprised by that either. Because after all, we humans are in need of belonging. It's at the core of our DNA. Collectively, it's embedded there. We need one another. We want to walk side by side with others. We want to care together about the things that matter, to help and to serve others, using our one wild, precious life to make a difference. We want guidance when life gets confusing. We want comfort when life gets hard. We want to celebrate in and throughout all these wonderful things that happen to us in life. We want to offer gratitude with the company of others for the blessings along the way. We also know that perceived isolation, that experience of feeling alone, even though you're surrounded by humanity, is epidemic, especially among our elders. We need to be in the company of others for our mental, spiritual, and physical health. But at the same time, we're so weary of these institutions, especially the church. In my over 30 years of ministry, I have heard countless stories, and I really do get it. They are stories that would break your heart. We are cautious about being tethered to a faith community because religion can be too exclusive, too tribal, too rigid, too many standards to live up to. And when you walk in and dare yourself to be in this place, the people don't actually practice what they preach. And it can be painful. It can be manipulative, hypocritical, only focused on our self-preservation. We're seen as not authentic, too steeped in the past with things that have no resonance for today. I've even heard some concede, "Oh, I love Christ. It's just Christians that I can't stand." I've heard it all. And into those parallel realities, the human need for connection and the fear of being tethered to something that is on a good day, flawed and human, comes our scripture reading today. Jesus' words are harsh, and they rest at the white-hot center of his invitation to followers and students to be in community. Amidst the contentiousness of his time, his own personal misgivings with his own faith community, the social political upheaval in and around Jerusalem, Jesus was calling his followers to create community that would become good news for all, that would project that good news, that would actually be it. Communities that would not only support those within the gathering, but would proclaim in thought and word, and most importantly in deed, a different way. A way of inclusion and forgiveness and justice and honesty in the face of the power structures of that time. A way that boldly proclaims by its very presence a just and generous love. And no one individual could possibly accomplish that alone, even with Christ at the center. It would take a movement, a collective, a nucleus of grounded people to ground people. The message they were called to demonstrate: freed people, free people. Healed people, heal people. Connected people, connect people. In short, this journey of discipleship is not about you alone. It's not about your personal salvation or even your private, personal relationship with Jesus. It's not all about that, as important as that might be. He repeats this phrase again and again. You have heard it said, but I say. And he's clearly emphasizing that things are not what you would expect when it comes to the law. What matters in each of these examples is not merely individual behavior, but relationality. And so a volatile exchange, a breach of trust, an objectifying gaze, a broken covenant, those are all obstacles to authentic, solid community. And we know that. We've experienced it. Healthy connections with one another need to communicate love. The community needs to communicate that. And friends, I think we would be missing the point if all we heard in this passage was dogma on the subject of purity. Because we're being presented with a revolution of relationships, a radical call to look beyond what the law says to its ultimate goal and end, which is the life and health of our human connections within community. Life in God's kingdom holds the welfare of our neighbors close to our hearts, while trusting that they're going to do the same for us as well. So I read this text again and again and again this past week, and it compelled me to ask, what kind of community do we want to inhabit? I think for most of us, we want a community that's made up of individuals who are open to growth, open to connecting on a level that both respects and challenges us to growing, to changing our thoughts, to opening up to new ideas, open to serving and to being served, open to helping, but also asking for help when we need it. We're looking for a community that's honest, whose yes is yes and whose no is no. Is not going to say one thing, but then when we get here and start living among you, you're going to say some other things that kind of push me out. No, we're not looking for perfect people who are all buttoned up and well-dressed. No, just people who are open and who know their need for God and one another. A community willing to be transformed into Christ-likeness for the sake of the world. But where it is true that discipleship is not all about you, it does begin with you. Your actions matter right now for the people that are sitting next to you in the pew. And what you do during the week reflects on and gives witness to the world and to your fellow parishioner about what you stand for and what you believe in and whose you are. In order to accomplish this kind of life-giving, transforming, and sustaining community, the kind that I think we long for, we have to consider our personal motivations and reactions. That's actually what the eyeball and the hand language is all about. The term "I" is an idiom for your inclination. The term "hand" is an idiom to refer to a person's power or authority. And idioms arise out of the Aramaic language and collapse kind of into one word, which is mental and physical. Action also and thought, both are acceptable understandings. So really what Jesus is saying here, if you have a habit of stealing, stop it. If you have a habit of envying, stop that too. If you have a habit of trespassing on other people's property, you better stop that too. If you have a habit of not exactly telling the truth, maybe you ought to make sure that your no is no and your yes is yes. Because any of these things to the contrary will make you feel quite separate and quite at odds from the very people you are seeking coherence with. Now, not today or in the afterlife, but right now. Matthew loves the word hell, and he uses it in those verses we read today 3 times alone and many others in the rest of his gospel. But the word that he uses is the word Gehenna, and it has nothing to do with our notion of eternal punishment. Gehenna was the garbage dump outside of Jerusalem. It was an actual place with which Jesus' listeners would have been very familiar. It was a literal fire that burned forever where people went to throw their trash, grimacing from the stench, gritting their teeth in revulsion, never venturing too close for fear that they might fall into that abysmal abyss. When Jesus spoke of Gehenna, his hearers would have thought of that valley of rotting, worm-infested garbage, where the fire always burned and the smoke always lingered, and if the wind blew just right, it was nauseating. The word called to mind horror and disgust in this life, today. It was right outside the city wall, and you didn't want to be out there. It was a powerful, powerful image of just how painful it is when we are separated from others because of our anti-community building behaviors. Better then, he says, to deal with your inner life, don't you think? Your problems, your motivations. Do that within the context of the community. Work towards reconciliation and respect. Be love within the company of others who are able to work it through with you. I think we all know that emotionally healthy and mature relationships are central to any community, whether it's your family or this church or the school or your workplace. We don't need the threat of eternal damnation to know what just doesn't work when it comes to connecting with one another. We know, and we don't have to probably be told. We understand our actions not only reveal who we are, but who we are as a community, the community of which we are a part, the community who we carry with us when we leave and go out into the wider world. When we really take that in, we begin to feel the weight of what it means to be a member of a community, and I think we should. And at the same time, to be a part of the gathering is to be reminded that you are not alone. You are never alone. The disciples needed to hear this truth, and we need to be reminded of it too. I don't think that we can live into this core message of Jesus, to walk the way of Christ, without the company of a faithful community beside us. Tripping and trying and tripping and trying again. Together, we dive into these ancient texts and practices and creeds, and we do find their resonance for us here today. Together, we proclaim Jesus' transforming presence, not because we're trying to make a better version of ourselves somehow, but because we're trying to be a more accurate reflection of Him, here and out there. A more accurate reflection of Christ at worship, in prayer, on the mission field, in the playing field, in the choir loft, in one another's living rooms, hospital rooms, classrooms, conference rooms. We want to be an accurate reflection of Christ when we agree and when we don't agree, and when we vehemently disagree, when we're mourning or when we're celebrating, when we think we like one another and maybe even when we are pretty sure we don't. We can be and must be an accurate reflection of Christ in all things. That's actually why I'm really looking forward to our Lenten series, which begins March 1st. It will be a community-wide Lenten study in sermons and in worship and in small group gatherings where we will walk with Jesus' ninefold path, a ninefold path for living. You may have heard it called the Beatitudes. It begins the Sermon on the Mount. And this core teaching of Jesus contains the power to transform us as individuals and as a community. And I don't think that we can walk through this path without doing it together. It's going to be challenging, especially in a world that favors and reveres individualism and autonomy and independence. The reality of connectedness and community and dependence is certainly not the way of the world. And so it's good for us to walk with these ideas and challenge ourselves together. Because when we remember that God is with us and is the energy between us, the love that sustains us and not just me, we begin to realize that we are not just members of this community, but we are shapers of it and shaped by it. And it is really good news. Thanks be to God. Amen.